Here we are. Thank you, everybody, listening, joining us for this great little talk on wines from Argentina. What's exciting, what's new, what does it look like here in our Canadian market? What are the prospects for Argentinian wine? All of our panelists today, most of us have been recently, and the wine world, of course, is getting bigger and bigger, and it's hard to get around everywhere. But we've all been recently to Argentina and came back with some revelations, I guess, in a certain way. So I don't know if everybody's in the same order. I guess we had just say hi, quickly introduce our panel. Carl Villeneuve Lepage from Restaurant Toqué in Montreal, Quebec.
Hi, everyone.
Best sommelier of Quebec, best sommelier of Canada. Chris Waters, should I call you Christopher? I'll call you Chris. From Hamilton, Ontario, Toronto. I think you're going to have to turn on your volume, Chris. One of our most respected wine writers in the country for many, many years. José Luis Fernandez.
Hi, everyone.
Hamilton also. Great dynamic person in the Toronto and Canada sommelier industry. Presently at the Hamilton Golf Club, right?
Yes, you got it.
DJ Kearney, if she needs introduction, has from BC, has trained some of the top sommeliers in this country, one of the best educators. Just thrilled to have you with us, DJ.
Thank you, Vero. Hello, everyone.
And Matt Landry, also from BC. Infamous sommelier. I don't know if that's a word in English. You have won quite a few titles also out west and are active still within a restaurant group. And happy to have you all on today. So quickly, let's just start. We'll dive right into the subject. Again, I'll just repeat it for those who were not with us when we started. In the right side of your screen, you have a button for chat if you'd like to ask questions that you can share either with all participants or just with the panel. So let's dive right in because there's a lot of things that we'd love to say. Just have to a quick look pan-Canadian across the country. What does the Argentinian wine offer look like? It's bizarre how sometimes, yeah, we're in the same country, but of course, provincial liquor laws being provincial, we all deal with different offers, different conditions. If we could start off with just a very short presentation. What does Argentinian wine look like in your province? If you have any idea of the percentage of total sales, if there's still a dominance of certain styles and so on. Carl, maybe you could start telling us about Quebec.
Yeah, sure, with pleasure. So, of course, SAQ has something very special. Has just changed its website, by the way, which is not always convenient. But what I realized when I checked out last week, according in comparison with what I've checked today, is that 5 of the Argentinian wine was sold out. So basically, I found out that there's 163 different wine from Argentina. Most of red. Of course, there's a little bit of white wine. There's 3 rosé, but basically it's 80% red, 20% white wine. And we realized in the last year that sales of Argentinian wines have grew up of 4.4%. We're talking about 43 million.4 in terms of money worth, which, well, to me, it's a good thing. It's increasing, despite the fact that calculation has been made through April. And we all know that in the last 2 years, in the last 2 weeks of March, there was not that much sales. But so at the beginning of these different, let's say, part of the year, it was quite great. I have to say that 67 wines are Malbec, 44 are Cabs, which are basically the most sold from Argentinian. Also, when we think of all the still wines sold in SAQ, of course, France and Italy are far in front, but Argentinian are 10th in terms of ranking, and it represents 2.6%, which 10th to be 2.6, there's a lot of market share that are within the 3 most productive country, and the most sales are attached to these kind of country. But what I think is outside Mendoza, there's very little offer, and this is something that we would talk about in a couple of minutes.
We will go over the regions, of course, but Mendoza does account for 75%, 80%.
Yeah, 72, I got here.
If you take the whole region of Cuyo with San Juan and La Rioja, it's 95% of all production, right? So it is a bit normal that Mendoza is, and we'll talk about also how Mendoza is not just one place and not just one style. Right? Chris, what does it look like in Ontario? Oh, sorry, your volume is off, Chris.
Volume. And to answer the question, I see 2.6 in volume and not value.
2.6% in volume. Okay.
Yeah. And the volume of Chris is off. That's right.
Chris, your volume, we can't hear you. If you don't mind, I'll just go on to DJ in the meantime. If you could tell us what it looks like in
Yes.
BC.
So I have a lot of interesting statistics. So let's start with, as a category, this is in British Columbia, it is 9th in terms of volume and dollar sales. There are 263,000 9-liter cases in the last rolling 12. It's down 1% over last year, so essentially flat. Chile ranks above it in 8th place, and Spain below in 10th place. The volume is $33.5 million, and that's down 4.5% over last year. And it's interesting that in the top 12 countries in sold in BC, only Argentina and Australia are down. Everything else is up. Chile's up, Spain's up, Portugal is up. So there are 665 SKUs represented in those 2,600 and, whatever, 250,000 9-liter cases. What's interesting is how it breaks down. 57% of the sales are at the BC liquor stores. 31% are at independent stores, the LRSs, and only 12% of the Argentine category sells on premise, right, in licensees. And, one of the worrisome things is that those sales are down 14.5% in the licensee chain from last year. The speculative listings are also down 22% over last year, and that is significant. What this points to is it's really, it's a counter sales category. It's a retail category and a massive one here in BC. 88% of the category is red. And if we look at the top 50 best-selling reds in Argentina, only 11 of them are not Malbec. A lot of it is focused in Mendoza, but there's actually quite a little bit of a range up and down the country. The price trends low, sort of $12 to $14. In the top 5 best-selling reds in BC, only one of them is $18. All of the rest are between 11 and 14. The whites have a little more interest in their SKUs. There are 109 white SKUs, and almost a third of those, or over a third of those, are Chardonnay, and a little Torrontés and quite a bit of Pinot Grigio.
Okay.
It's skinny for BC.
You said the part on the on-trade, the licensee was very, very small, and it has gone down. Right?
Correct.
That's what I understood. Okay. Chris, do we have you on volume?
Here's hoping. Am I here?
Yes. Lovely. Okay. So a few words on Ontario. What's the Argentinian offer like?
So I guess quite literally we are in between Quebec and BC. A bit rosier picture here, similar to what Carla was saying. we've got a sense of about 3% volume is wines of Argentina, but I don't want to get into straight stats because they're mind numbing, and math and I don't get along. So let's talk about some bright spots. I think what's interesting is lessons learned from the Shiraz or bust aspect of wines of Australia, that even the LCBO is working, I think, with WOFA and wineries to make sure that the offer is diverse enough that if people get off the Malbec train, there's something for them to go on to stay in the shelf space and not necessarily just jettison going off to somewhere else. But Malbec obviously is the White Knight, continues to sell very well, 16% at the what we call the general list or wines LCBO wine shops, but also 38% growth at vintages. And I think that's the bright spot, is that in that kind of $15 to $25 range where there's been an erosion and pretty much a softening in general in our wine market, pre-COVID lockdown, pandemic, mass shopping, of course. Argentina was carrying strong on Cabernet Sauvignon, carrying strong on Malbec. Tarenta is just kind of holding firm, but holding firm is not bad when everything else around you is declining. And I guess the other factor is the spike for pandemic shopping really kicked all wine sales up in the province. But for Argentina, there was a lot of return to some of those comforting brands, 34% growth at the general list, the more affordable selections, 42%, that's the thing that I think is huge, 42% at the more rarefied, or what we would call our vintages stores, similar to the signature stores. So a bit more premium. So very good positioning here in the sense that Argentina not only is cheap and cheerful, they also have a diversity and a respect that people are willing to dig deeper into their wallets to pay a premium.
Yeah, that's interesting to see, right? Because I think that's a problem we're seeing elsewhere, is a bit of a resistance to higher price points because they have made their place on the market with very user-friendly and expensive Malbecs, right?
Yeah.
So that's very heartening to see. In terms of the consumer's perception, right? If I look at Quebec, it's still a bit kind of monochrome, right? The consumer associates very readily Argentinian wine with Malbec. For a large portion of them, still with inexpensive wine, right? So there's still that kind of one, a bit of a narrow vision of it. I'm wondering if it's any different in the other provinces. DJ?
You know, the perception is very much about value pricing and confidence, right? There's no disappointment. The wines are accessible. They're very user-friendly. And I think that's what really drives sales. It's, you know, this is a value category for the most part. It's interesting that COVID saw or boosted a jump of almost 8% sales in March of the category. A lot of that was larger format. So, you know, when times are tough, people are looking for those reliable, you know, delicious, pleasurable drinks for a reasonable price. I talked to 3 different stores to prepare for this in 3 different areas. And, you know, the one, you know, that has a lot of bulk, inexpensive Malbec wasn't selling a great deal. One doesn't sell, another one doesn't sell anything over $10, $20 without a lot of work. And then another one with a very, very educated staff team had no trouble selling $30 and $40 and $50 Argentine wine. So I think so much of it is about who's selling it and how they nudge people up to different wines and different styles.
Okay. Matt, how about in the restaurants? Is the perception similar? Do you see different tiers, or is it still a little bit difficult to get them to buy up?
I would say there's almost like a generational gap in terms of what I see in restaurants. I think an older generation still thinks of Argentina purely as value, as we've said, and they're looking for something quite affordable. And I think young people kind of think of it as an old person's wine, and it has a certain, that international palette of big and bold and smooth is becoming less and less a thing for younger consumers who are looking for either Pinot Noir, that style of wine, or natural wine, which is usually not that. And so it is an interesting conundrum. And also, I mean, I work in a very small restaurant that is very neighborhood focused, a lot of regulars. People always want something new. And so Malbec often is not what you're looking for when you want something new. It's sort of the old standby.
Yeah. Jose, how is it in your restaurants?
Well, I work in a private golf club, so the clientele is slightly different. But for the most part, what they know about Argentina is mostly Malbec. Some people who have been to the country, they know a little bit of Torrontés, and they make some Cabernet Sauvignon. But the main thing is Malbec for them most of the time. Now, what I find interesting, I was mentioning this to you before, like I sell more Pinot Noir from Argentina than Malbec here, which is such an odd situation. But at the same time, they're willing to learn. Every time that somebody is willing to ask me to recommend something, I'm happy to share everything that I saw that was going on in Argentina.
So there's definitely an openness, right? There's that automatic relation between Argentina and Malbec that consumer makes, but there's definitely an openness to try new things, right? The Pinot Noir, just out of curiosity, was it lower price point or higher price point?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, when I have like on the entry level side, but also the high end side, not a lot in between, but those two sides. Yeah.
Okay. Cal, do you have a very different perception from your consumers in the restaurant?
Well, first of all, let's make everyone know that I'm working in a fine dining restaurant, and most of what people consume is about the wine pairings. So they don't have to decide exactly what they're going to drink, as I'm the one who's deciding which wine is going to be paired with each course. So I can easily bring high-end wine on the main course from Argentina, like I did a few months before before I traveled there, with Cheval des Andes, for example, which is a 3-digit type of bottle, and easily I can adjust the price of the wine pairing with other wines. It's going to be less expensive, so it's kind of not the same reality. But what I like about what Matt just said, the gap between different generation of consumers, that's true, but also there's the difference between local consumers and touristic clientele, which to where I'm working is mostly from the US. And I saw a couple comments on the right side from Mr. Bourne, and was talking about that it's a bargain to talk about Argentinian wine comparable with a similar level in terms of, quality from America, from actually United States. And it's quite a great bargain to me. And I think when I've got people coming from the US, they are more aware of the, oak-driven wines and big, bold kind of thing, which is not the case with Quebec clientele, which are more towards the, just like José was talking about, the Pinot Noir, the lighter style, the producer that are trying to get rid of too much oak. It's very different from local, touristic. It's really widespread.
I think there's a few comments about how we don't see Argentinian wines on tasting menus or on wine bar wine lists. Okay, so that's a problem, and that is the role of the trade. So as I said earlier, we were all excited. We all think there's some really exciting things in Argentinian wines. It's a little bit our role, either as sommeliers or as media, to kind of pass on that excitement, right? What are the things that you feel strongly about. You think that you know, in the new and exciting and things that could really get people talking about Argentinian wine, other than just, you know, the stereotypical Malbec. DJ, do you want to start on this?
Well, absolutely. So, you know, my conversion experience happened when I judged the wine awards of Argentina. They're, you know, they're very important. They're very traditional and practiced, and you taste hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wines. And, you know, that was, it was a mind-blowing conversion experience for me to understand how exciting and diverse, different, thrilling, expressive the wines are. And, you know, all of the wines, but let's focus on Malbec, because that was the revelation to me in particular. Right, there are just about 110,000 acres of Malbec in Argentina. Almost a quarter of all things planted are Malbec. You know, it's great that consumers have a general understanding of this grape already. It's accessible, it's value priced, it's round, it's fruity, it's mellow, it hits all the pleasure points, and it's synonymous with Argentina. You know, these are all very, very positive things, because there's so much confidence in the grape and the style. And yes, it might be slightly generational, and you know, it might be for reasons that aren't about complexity and other things in wine, but there's an opportunity to tell the story of Malbec and to expand the narrative and make that story much broader. You know, it's very lucky that this grape is a superb transmitter of terroir, right? The goose has laid a golden egg, and its name is Malbec, and that's something to always keep sight of. When I was there, people kept asking, you know, throughout the awards and after the awards, is what shall we do with Malbec? What's the next step for us? Well, you know, it's easy, because there's so much exciting diversity. You know, the climate, altitude, longitude, latitude, soil types. 10 years ago, it was all about altitude, and we were really getting, you know, excited and geeky about different expressions of Malbec, you know, at 1,000 feet and 1,500 and then 2 and 3. Well, 10 years on, it's much more about soil expression now. So peeling back the land, especially in Mendoza, which is such a complex region. You know, you want to draw a parallel with Burgundy and regional terroir expressions. Here it is in Mendoza, you know, if not the entire country, for a fraction of the price. You can have these amazing terroir experiences. So alluvial, fluvial, clay, limestone, there's such a range of an amplitude of expressions on different soil types. The winemakers are young, they're well traveled, they have a global perspective now, and they're really looking to change winemaking to allow these to show. Right, so more transparency in the wine, obviously a lot of concrete, a lot of neutral barrel, and you know, the other thing to me that's very exciting are blends. Malbec with a little bit of Tannat, Malbec with Syrah, which is 10% of all the planted red grapes. Of course, Bonarda, the potential for excitement and learning new things, and then trying to get the consumer to also be excited about that. You know, that's one of the challenges for Argentina now, and it's an important one, and it should be a doable one.
I like the comparison with Burgundy in terms of terroir, right? That is really something that's happening on the ground in Argentina. But I remember every time when they would say, "Oh, this is from Las Compuertas," or "This is from El Cepillo," and I said, "Why?" And on the label, it would just say Valle de Uco at best, or Mendoza. Okay, so that's something I feel very strongly about, and I think we should all encourage. And I know it's hard because Mendoza is such a selling point in itself. who knows El Cepillo, right? But all this fabulous work they're doing in identifying these terroirs, they should put the names on the label more prominently. It's difficult, and you can always put all three, right? Mendoza, Valle de Uco, El Cepillo. Right? But I feel very, very strongly about using those words and putting them out there, so that that's a way of telling people. They will ask, what is this? And it's a great gateway for us to explain the great variety that there is. Chris, you wanted to tell us a little bit about Torrontés?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I just think, just to echo what you've just been talking about, I think the sophistication of Argentina has been that they have been able to transcend. When they came on the market, when Fusion introduced everybody to inexpensive Malbec, we were all drinking what? Typicity. We just wanted, if it said a grape variety on the label, we wanted typicity. And we wanted it to smell and taste like that. And they did that incredibly well. But what's the evolution that's been is that as everyone shifted to minerality and wines of authenticity and wines of with a sense of place, it's like, well, we got that too. We got you covered. We can still deliver those kind of wines that have moorishness, that taste like more, but we also can dig down a lot deeper and give you nuance and shades. And I think talking about Torrontés is a great way to do it, because I mean, I've done 15 plus years of wine spirit education, trust teaching. And in the early days, you used to have to always have the Torrontés for level 3 diploma. You used to basically buy armloads of it when you saw a good one, because standing in front of somebody and saying, "Oh yeah, it's grapey and oily, meh." What else? Why are we talking about this? Why are we spending 15, 20 minutes? Why is this exam worthy? Even last year in the diploma exam, Argentina was the spotlight country. The trio was Torrontés, Malbec from Patagonia, and Cabernet Sauvignon. And so, to me, the banker was great. It's like, yeah, I'd love to have a Torrontés, and then that purpley violet laced Malbec. And so to me, it was, hopefully all the IWEG students crushed it, but and had a great success with it. But Torrontés has really become so much more sophisticated, so much less in your face in intensity. As you start to see lees aging and barrel work and native yeast ferments that still show this is a really exuberant grape variety. You don't need the performance enhancing things that make it taste like lemon pledge. You can have an ability to really show the aromatic charm of it, but also some sophistication and structure. And I think as a single varietal grape variety, a single varietal wine, a huge unique selling opportunity. But to me, they're just really starting to find out how to use it in blends, similar to the evolution of Malbec. How can that, with so many other things that they have, just to add some spice or some structure or some intensity. It's a great grape variety that we only see of just a smattering of here, but get excited because I think there's more coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we were used to it mostly from the north, right? From Santa, and now we're seeing more and more in other regions also. And like you say, the oak age versions, and I've had at least one orange from Torrontés that was really, really, really cool, right? Like the Viogniers and the Muscats and the Gewürztraminers those aromatic varietals turn out really cool with skin maceration. Torrontés seems to have that too. So yeah, there's a lot, because that was one I'm first personally guilty of. Torrontés, right? It was very it was very aromatic. It had a very specific aromatic profile, but right, there was not much depth or now. But now that's changing a lot, and I've tasted quite a few that have made me completely change my mind.
Dry now too, right? They've dried out, and
exactly.
That's been part of the success.
And you also see, and that's great. That's where we start to see the regional variation, because in Salta and in Mendoza, it's completely different expressions of Torrontés, right? Even without dealing with winemaking, just in terms of the terroir. Carl, I think you were excited about Patagonia.
Yeah, well, excited about many things, and when I'm trying to read on the right side again, I see people talking about Cabernet Sauvignon, which is effective and sometimes can reach like level of some Bordeaux when they try not to get too high on oak. The thing is, there's lower yield than Malbec for the same price. So that's the reason why it's kind of complicated to get more of these cabs, and people are getting away, uprooting their cabs to make more Malbec. So this is kind of a problem, but it's reality. But yeah, about Patagonia, we've been there. It's very strange because you could see within a very small terroir patch, different grape varietal coexisting together, like Malbec, besides Chardonnay, besides Pinot Noir, Merlot, and Cab, and they all grow in the same place. When you think about the old world, of course, it would be more dramatically planted in different areas. But there's for sure one thing that I really like about Patagonia is, well, we will get more into organic eventually, but it's so windy that they don't need to work with a lot of, fun anti-fungus and stuff like this. It's a place which is so windy that it's naturally a saint. And everything is, it's kind of complicated to talk with some producer when you're out there because the wind seems to never stop. But this is, more great than a bad thing. The Pinot Noir we enjoyed there, also with smaller producer, when we're talking about an old region that has seen, big, I wouldn't say society, but bigger producer stands out and, let's say, dominates the market outside Argentina. We could see more and more small producer, not only of Pinot Noir or Chardonnay or all that, but also of sparkling wine. If we try to forget about Mendoza, just because it's by far the first producer of every kind of wine you could think of, Patagonia is gaining in importance as much in Rio Negro than in Neuquén or Chubut for sparkling wine producer. And it's great to see the variety of style because you have the Charmat method, which of course is a little bit less expensive to do than the traditional method, but both are being experimented and offered. The thing is, there's 5% exported. So that's why we don't see anything, at least in Quebec, available. And when you think of the importance of sparkling wine at the beginning of a meal, when it's summer coming out outside, especially when nobody works, I think they could really, dig a place to their wines in their market because it's an important style which is not represented. It could be a really nice B option to not only champagne but crema, cavas, because they have big enough production to be able to make it approachable, affordable for consumers. So these things, as well as rosé, I haven't talked about. I haven't tried it a lot, but there's almost nothing here. And this is something we could try to work on, that's for sure. And excites me.
It's still a very small region, right, in terms of the total volume and the total surface. But yeah, it's interesting. In the Pinot Noir, right, there's Umberto Canale, which I think is probably the largest producer, and we see the Pinot Noir has been in Quebec at least for a while, so at very low price, good value. But then you have people like Chakra, Noemia also. So there's really both ends of the spectrums, and considering it's such a small region. And like you said, a little bit of crazy weather. We'll come back to it when we're going to talk. We're going to talk some more about, see some people asking about organic and biodynamics. We're going to come back to that. Matt, I'd like you to say a few words about, you were quite taken by the Semillon.
Semillon, yeah, absolutely. And sorry, I'm just having flashbacks from taking off a plane in Rio Negro, and I'm already terrified of flying, and how windy it was. I'm just getting flashbacks of our trip. Semillon, it's maybe it's a bit of a moonshot to say that Semillon should be the next big white grape out of Argentina, but there's a lot of things going for it. Semillon came over at the same time as Malbec. And going back to the late 60s, early 70s, Semillon was the most planted white grape in Argentina. So I think what people are rediscovering now are these old vines. And you see quite a few examples of people working with 60, 70-year-old Semillon vines. And some of the best whites, the best white wines I had there were definitely these sort of Semillons that maybe see a bit of barrel fermentation, just a little bit of oak. And they kind of grow everywhere. We had some in Patagonia, we had some in Beyond Cuyo, we had some in the Valley, we had, other than maybe the north, we had examples from everywhere. And it's a really interesting style. Even younger, you'd think of maybe Hunter Valley, but those wines can tend to take 10, 15 years to really kind of open up. And it seems that these wines are quite immediately approachable. Just like great, for Torrontés, which can be a bit over the top for some palates. It has a great subtlety, but then has, can have a richness and a waxiness and a great texture the way Chardonnay does. It's just a very versatile grape down there. And I think there's maybe 750 hectares. Like there's not a lot down there anymore, but I think it could be a trophy wine for producers who are discovering old vines, and kind of get into that $30 price point, which we don't see enough of from Argentina.
Mm. So old vines is definitely an important factor, right? And that's also kind of a defining factor. I always talk about this with consumers because people always associate old vines, they must be in Burgundy and all these great places. No, places that have been economically going well for don't have old vines, they replant, right? So Argentina has a huge wealth of old vines. The percentage of vines under 20 years old is actually quite small. So we didn't mention it yet. We will when we get into sustainability. Many ungrafted vines, right? And there's a huge percentage still of ungrafted material. And then, so you talked about Semillon and that, right? Because again, the supremacy of Malbec. Semillon is an example, but in Mendoza, there's close to 150 or more grape varieties, right? So that automatic association with Malbec is one, but it's by far not the only one. And Semillon really interesting and ages fabulously well, right? I don't know the chance of it. You can actually taste some pretty old bottlings of Semillon when you're there, and at prices that are actually quite remarkable. José, I'll finish off with you, and maybe you wanted to talk about Cabernet Franc.
Yes, Cabernet Franc. So it's a grape variety that we see mostly in France, in the Loire, and it's a fantastic grape. But what we can see is most people, when they refer to Cabernet Franc, they think about pyracines and all these green bell pepper notes and all that sort of notes that we are used to it from that area. But what we found in Argentina is they have no problem in ripening the grape variety, and they grow it pretty much in many places. But the best examples, in my opinion, that I found are more expressive and better balanced were from Patagonia down south. So definitely fuller body in style. Again, they don't have a problem ripening the grape. The alcohol levels were about 14% and a little bit higher as well. Nicely balanced. I remember seeing they use French and American oak. Again, if you use all these things and make a nice balanced wine, those green bell pepper notes that sometimes we're used to it, seeing them in many Cabernet Franc, they're more on the riper side, more like roasted red bell pepper, and it's more balanced. It's the ones that are very elegant, food friendly. They're pretty delicious as well. So it's a great variety that is doing great things down there.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed with some Cabernet Franc from Pedernal Valley up in San Juan, right, just above. So there's also Cal talked about Patagonia, but there's also these different terroirs that are popping up for us. They've been there, they've been exploited before. There's been vineyards throughout the centuries, but obviously a lot of these places are also very remote. Right? There's two things we didn't talk about. There's the fact that the Argentinians do drink quite a bit. A lot is consumed domestically, even if, just like Europe, consumption has gone down dramatically from 100 liters per capita to they're probably close to 25. And then there's the remoteness of many of these places. Pedernal, or what's the other valley? Calingasta up in San Juan. They're so far away from, and so there's vineyards there, people are making wine, but there's very few wineries on, and yeah, they're difficult of access. So these are other things that maybe make it less obvious for foreigners to find out about all these things. Somebody, I think it was Isabelle, asked about the percentage of Semillon, and Louis-Jacques answered 2%. I had even less than 1%. It's definitely not above 2%. I thought it was even below 1%, but very, very small numbers. There was another question I wanted to get to. Percentage of Semillon. Oh, and the view of, so yeah, somebody has asked about Bonarda. Maybe some of you want to chip in. I'll be quick. I like Bonarda. I think it's really cool. I mean, it was the first grape I really got to know from Argentina outside of Malbec. The first time I went to Argentina was some of the only wines we could try other than Malbec. I'm really not a fan of Bonarda and oak. It annoys me if I see Reserve or Grand Reserve on a bottle of Bonarda. For me, Bonarda and oak just don't go well. I like the juicier, fruitier side of Bonarda. I think it should be their Gamay more than anything else. That's my opinion. I don't know if any of you have something to say about Bonarda.
Well, quickly, I felt that most producers working 100% Bonarda are usually the ones that are big enough to afford that. It's really often blended, and outside being called Zapata or all the bigger producer, I haven't seen a lot.
There's quite a bit, I think. Well, I tried quite a bit in Argentina. Maybe we see.
Okay, I was not lucky
I know
enough.
in Quebec, the only one we got for years was Altos Las Hormigas. We probably still do, which was a good example.
Which is a good, yeah, exactly.
Of that lighter, fresher, juicier style. We'll go back to the Criollas, mentioned Pedernal, the Atlantic region. Nobody talked about it. It's still very small, right? So there's officially a fourth region. Most of Argentinian vineyards are in the west, on the foothill of the Andes. But there are now vineyards also closer to the Atlantic coast. It's Trapiche, right, who has a Costa y Pampa project where we've already seen in our markets their Pinot Noir and their Chardonnay. I think for the first time in the last year. Really interesting, completely different expression, right? In Mendoza, and we're in a very continental climate, super dry. In, of course, in the Atlantic vineyards, much more humid, much more rainfall, so completely different conditions. The Pinot Noir and the Chardonnays I tasted were at 12.5% alcohol. So very interesting what's happening there. I'll have to see what comes out of it in the next few years. And even in traditional places that we know of, right? Like Uco, where it keeps, a little bit like in Chile, it keeps going higher and higher. DJ, you mentioned that there's much more attention paid to soil than altitude, but I think it's still, a combination of both that really makes a difference, because and even more than that, there's even the mountain itself. You can take two vineyards quite far apart from each other in Mendoza that are at the same altitude, but they're not the same distance from the Andes. And that completely changes their climate in terms of the cooling of the temperature, how much cold air they're getting from the Andes, and so on. So it's quite complex, and the exploration of all those terroirs in Mendoza and Uco were quite cool. Okay, sustainability. Somebody asked, I think there was a question about the percentage of organic vineyards. So a few of you already said, right, that there's the wind in Patagonia. There's just the overall dryness. It's not very humid. So good conditions for organic farming, right? And I would even tend to say that there's a lot of it that is organic by default, almost in a way. Their biggest problem is not fungus, it's hail and frost. Right? 3% of total vineyards are certified organic. So it's pretty low, right? If you look at probably the highest I've seen, turn around 15, 17% in specific appellations. Not a country has that. In terms of country, I think 10, 12% maybe is the highest. I'm saying that. If anybody wants to contradict me, feel free. 6% of wineries do make organically certified wine. But I think there's a lot of cases where there is organic practices, but no certification. I don't know if any one of you would like to add on that about sustainability, organic, biodynamic, natural. All of that is going on. All right.
I guess you mentioned like all the conditions in the whole country. It's mostly dry. It's mostly a desert. It's windy, so they don't really have any trouble to be using chemicals or pesticides or all these chemically engineered things. So it's easier for them to be more on the organic and again biodynamic path.
There's quite a few. I mean, what I write I mean, there's quite a few certified even working in biodynamics, right? But again, Noemia and Chakra, I talked about in Patagonia. There's Alpamanta. There's even, I remember last time I went, I had a meeting with 3 winemakers that were all practicing biodynamics, and one of them was Chacana. And I like, what do you mean Chacana? I've had that. I considered it rather big, industrial, commercial wines. That's what I had been exposed to. And see, they had completely changed over a period of about 7 or 8 years, went to realize their soils were not very, very much alive, went to organic, to biodynamic. Great producer now, right? So it's also the importance of not staying stuck on old kind of preconceived ideas. There's definitely a movement towards, we have Alpamanta that's quite present in Quebec. I don't know, but there's a lot of, even among the bigger ones, right? Argentina for me is a place where, well, in the world over, we should be careful about comparing small and big, right? But Zucardi, one of the biggest players, right? In Argentina, probably one of the most dynamic in terms of terroir exploration. And if I'm not mistaken, all of their wines are wild ferments.
They are.
We're talking about huge.
And organically farmed, and they choose not to certify.
Okay, so that's a big, right? And that's a locomotive, like it's a train engine pulling the country forward. That's also something I think is really cool to mention about Argentina, is that you have people like Sebastián Zucardi from one of the biggest wine families. There's complete openness and communication with small guys who are starting up. Right? The younger generation is very much open about exchanging information, and I think through that there's a really there's a great collaboration between this group of winemakers I had met that were working in biodynamic. Zucardi is part of that, as well as a tiny little guy who farms 5 hectares and makes his own wine, right? So that very close collaboration and communication, I think, really helps in moving things forward. It's how do we get people here to know about all these things?
Yeah.
What can we do? What can Wines of Argentina do? What should the media, the sommeliers do to communicate all these exciting things that are happening? DJ, you had some thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, in my province, this is such a retail category, so it really has to be a game of 2 halves, right? What campaigns can be in stores to help with this this message of diversity and excitement and things, well beyond Malbec, as fascinating as it is, and the diversity within Malbec, but how can we get consumers aware of that in the BC liquor stores or in the 31% of LRSs? The other half of the game is about the trade, right? About sommeliers and really educated people who can just ferment some excitement about Argentina. It has to be a 2-pronged attack here, definitely focusing on retail campaigns, and then the trade need to be educated. We have all been absolutely changed forever by our experiences in Argentina. And the more that happens to influencers and tastemakers and somms and wine buyers, you know, that's the way, I think that's the only way to attack the diversity and you know, and excitement in the smaller producers and the organic and biodynamic, different winemaking styles and regimes and producers. That's how they are going to get a foothold in the market through people like Matt in his restaurants. Otherwise, it has to be an exciting, compelling, innovative campaign within the stores.
I would say, you know, the frustrating thing, the somewhat frustrating thing about Malbec is that it can make the somm obsolete on its own floor. You know, if I list Malbec and 4 other wines, and those other wines are niche, weird things, I'm not going to have a conversation with the guest, because the guest is just going to order the Malbec without talking to me. And so what happens, and I think you see it at a lot of restaurants, not my own, that you know, they put a Malbec on and they mark it up extra high, and they use that to pay for the wines they're more excited about. And sometimes you can feel that lack of excitement about it from somms, that it's sort of a thing they have to have because the customer demands it. And so I think the other grapes or other wine styles are really the way to get Argentina into restaurants, more so than simply Malbec. You know, I'm in a very small place, and I get a very odd list where it's very verbose, and I get an opportunity to contextualize wines. So if I'm going to be the one person carrying Argentinian Semillon, which might actually happen, you know, if I just put it on my list, it kind of can get lost. But if I create a section on my list called, you know, the white wines of Argentina, and it's with Chardonnay and it's with Fernandez, and you get to create an educational map of 3 different regions and sort of address that stigma in advance of being like, well, forget what you know about Argentinian wine. Here's 3 examples of really interesting stuff. I've always found that to be a really successful way to kind of change people's perceptions about, you know, Australia or South Africa or these countries that are sort of defined by certain wine styles or price points.
It's still, I find just recently I had the experience of serving blind an Argentinian Pinot, very much part of that new trend, something very fresh, very pure, completely organic, to somebody who was very biased about Argentinian wines. Oh, there's only those big, fat, juicy, oaky Malbecs, right? Served this wine blind. They loved it. They were all over, and they couldn't believe it was Argentinian, right? I think we really have a job to do in communicating that. But maybe also, like you say, there's not a lot of wine bars that will have Argentinian listings, but then we're not the importers either. There has to be work on part of the importers to bring in those wines, right? I wanted to go back to it. Somebody had mentioned, you know, what about the Criollas, right? It's a 25% still maybe of grape varieties, the Criolla Cereza, Chica, and Criolla Grande. Those are also, I mean, look at what's happening with País all over the world. In Chile, with Tristan Prieto in the Canary Islands, and nobody can get enough of it. Argentina should be doing that with Criolla also, and they are. There's a whole bunch of small projects that are working with the Criollas, and it's a huge part. I think that's a great story, right, Matt? You were saying, again, we have to have a story to tell, and people love the stories. If you make your flight of white Argentinian wines, right? Or if there's a story, I mean, serving a Criolla, you could talk about an hour to somebody about, right? It's the history of grape growing in North America, in the Americas.
Well, if I can add something, my suggestion to WOFA to improve and to elevate discussion around it, I just realized with this organization here that there's more than 100 people who are hearing about, market. All of what I've seen here is people that are professionals. It's some, and more than half has been traveling to Argentina. So we should take this bunch of people and bring them to another level of comprehension of the terroir. We have to geek out about terroir because these guys are I see some chefs and friends and all that. So first of all, same, organization, but geek out with professionals from Argentina who would talk about specificity of terroir. And then with this knowledge, we could try to convince some wine importer to bring more of the smaller producers, those who are not like the big society, and try to elevate a little bit the price point, more premium wines, not even SAQ. We would just talk about private import sales to restaurant. Of course, it's a weird timing to talk about restaurant, but it's going to come back. And from that point, having them by the glass, a little higher price point, even by the glass, could be easily affordable, and also to diverse, trying to step outside Malbec and think of, we were talking about all these grapes without trying to repeat it. So this, I think, could be great. And next time people are invited in Argentina, whether it is SOMS or private importer, that could be great to see. And like a wine fair in Argentina, which small producer can participate in without having to spend as much as you have to when you want to receive these traveler inside your winery, because they don't have a lot. They don't all have enough money to do that. So that way we could encourage smaller producer and bring a more geek approach and profound suggestions about the offer.
And I think we mentioned earlier the important collaboration going on between different producers, between different generations, exchange of information. Well, same thing, right? Wines of Argentina should represent the big and the small, and not be afraid to showcase the small ones that maybe there's not a lot of it, but it's what gets people excited, gets people talking about it. If we get them through consignment, through private import, we will see them then in cool restaurants, in wine bars, and that's how it gets down to the consumer, right?
Relentless education, right? There should be a global educator. You just have to hammer away at the education programs. We've seen Chile do that. We've seen Australia do that, and it will trickle down. There will be a payoff. Education is everything.
So says DJ, the great Canadian educator. And the proof is everybody who's followed in your footsteps learning from you. We're just under an hour now. We'll go through questions. I'm sorry, I can't read and talk at the same time. I hope this went all right for everybody. This conversation was recorded, so if anybody would like to see it, it will be available on the Wines of Argentina website in a week. Everybody who registered should receive a link for it. Again, if you want to see amazing maps, photographs, and just give you an inkling, if you have no clue of how deep they've gotten into exploring the terroirs, again, on Instagram, follow Geografia del Vino. It's Guillermo Corona. Absolutely lovely to watch. And I think I'm going to wrap it up there. All of the panelists, DJ, Matt, Chris, José, Cal, thank you so much for being there, for your insights. Looking forward to being all together and sharing a glass of Argentinian wine together, our latest discovery, or even better, over there.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for taking part. Thank you, Wines of Argentina, for hosting this. I forgot to say, I think there's a poll for all the participants. Did I say it in the beginning? Again, on your the right-hand box there, where you have the button for chat, there's a button for polls. There's 2 polls. Very, very quick questions to answer. If you could answer those, that would be great. Thanks again, everybody. Nice to see you virtually, the panelists and all the participants that were there. Thanks for joining. Hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody.
Au revoir.
Thanks. Goodbye. Ciao, ciao.
Yeah.